when the music fades and all is stripped away, and I simply come, longing just to bring something less of worth that will bless your heart.
And happy solemnity of feast, the feast of Christ the King. For Christians, this is the last week of our church calendar. Next Sunday, we'll celebrate our new year as Advent begins. And our church puts before us, in the last week of ordinary time, the feast of Christ the King. The feast of Jesus Christ, who reigns over heaven and earth and calls us to be as part of his kingdom, as sons and daughters and heirs, as St. Paul says, to the throne. And so that's the first thing to note in our readings today. Do we acknowledge Christ as King? Not just in our words on Sunday, but do we acknowledge Christ as King in all days of the week? We cannot have a spirituality that acknowledges Christ as King just on Sunday as if it's a football game. We have to have a spirituality more like vice baseball. It acknowledges Christ the King every day of the week. So, where does our world want to seduce us to acknowledge other things as King? Our readings in the first reading is the book of Daniel, where we see a vision of Christ our King coming in glory to reign. And in the Gospels, we see that glory is masked in suffering in this life. In fact, there's something mysterious our Gospels present with Jesus before Pilate, that his kingship will not be fully attained until the second coming. But in this life, for those that serve him as King, by acknowledging Christ as King, that means we will also be embracing the suffering that comes with that stance in a world that often rejects him. So where then in our life can our hearts flutter with a little bit of weakness or lack of resolve when we want to acknowledge Christ as King, but we receive pushback? Perhaps pushback in getting less playing time when we miss for Sunday games. Perhaps pushback when we acknowledge Christ as King in the locker room. Perhaps pushback in our families or in our jobs. And where can we have boldness to acknowledge Christ as King? In surprising in little ways and in big ways. I can't help but think of Joe Mazzulla, head coach for the Celtics, a few years ago when the royal family of England came to visit him, and he was asked afterwards, what did he think of the royal family watching him? Without missing a beat, he said, what royal family? Was Jesus, Mary, and Joseph present? That's the only royal family I recognize. It stunned the reporter into silence as Joe Mazzulla, in an ordinary interview after a game for the Celtics, professed his fealty to Christ the King, even as he tried to coach the Celtics in their NBA season. So let's look for ways then, this week and every day this year, to profess our love and loyalty to Christ the King, both in good times and in bad, because we serve the greatest King possible, one who has redeemed us with his life, offered us his grace and holiness, and destines us for greatness in heaven if we but love him and serve him in this life. May God bless you all. Amen.
I grew up in a family of 10. I was the oldest, 5 boys, 5 girls. We were a very competitive family. My grandfather was a football coach for a number of years. He was football, basketball, baseball, pretty much any sport he was a coach. Growing up, my dad was a coach. He coached soccer, he coached football, he coached wrestling. Wrestling was kind of always our main sport, and we were smaller kids. So growing up, we already kind of knew we weren't going to be football players or basketball players, and so we kind of knew that was going to be our sport. Some things that really stood out to me at an early age was, and now as I reflect back on it, in a competitive world, it's easy to lose sight of your priorities. And something my dad did very intentionally that still sticks out with me, and I try to pass on to my own children, is the prioritization of things in your life. And our faith, our Catholic faith, was so important to us. And we would travel to tournaments and have wrestling meets, but we never forgot to pray at night before we went to bed, and we never missed mass. And there are plenty of times where it was inconvenient or it would have been easy to say, well, we just can't make it. We never missed it. And I saw how important that was to him at an early age, and that resonated with me. Another story that kind of really changed, I think, the trajectory of the way I viewed sports and my own faith and my faith journey. I started getting pretty good at wrestling and was competing at a really high level in high school. And it was my senior year. And we're from Tennessee. Tennessee's not known for wrestling, being a wrestling state, but we went up to Ohio, and Ohio was putting it on all the Tennessee kids except for me. And so I made a point to really try to embarrass the kids. And I remember after that tournament, my dad looked at me and said, when we were driving back home, he said, "If you ever wrestle like that again, I'm kicking you off the team." And that wasn't, at first I thought he was bluffing. You're not going to kick your son and the best wrestler on the team off. But what I learned from that was the way I conducted myself and carried myself was so much more important than the results. And I think that really helped me understand the virtues and the formation that I was getting in the sports was so much larger than my achievements. And sports was a great venue for me to learn that.